What's up, everyone? I hope you're all doing wonderfully tonight as we dive into a truly fascinating and thought-provoking story that's making waves across the nation. We're talking about President Donald Trump's recent decision to commute the sentence of Larry Hoover, a former Chicago gang leader who has been in prison since 1973. This is a story that touches on criminal justice, presidential power, and the ongoing debate between redemption and public safety. So, let's break it down and explore what this means for the country, for Chicago, and for the broader conversation on justice reform. First, let's set the stage with some background. Larry Hoover is no ordinary figure. Born in 1950, he's the founder of the Gangster Disciples, a notorious Chicago street gang that became one of the largest criminal organizations in the U.S. Hoover was first imprisoned in 1973 for a murder conviction, and in 1997, he was hit with additional life sentences for running a criminal enterprise from behind bars, involving charges like conspiracy, extortion, and money laundering. For over 50 years, he's been locked up, much of that time in solitary confinement at the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, a place known for housing some of the most dangerous inmates in the country. His case has been a lightning rod for discussion, not just because of his crimes, but because of the questions it raises about long-term incarceration and the possibility of rehabilitation. Now, fast forward to May 28, 2025. President Donald Trump, in his second term, decides to commute Hoover's federal sentence. What does that mean? A commutation doesn't erase the conviction. It shortens the sentence, potentially allowing Hoover to be released or significantly reducing his time. The exact details of how much time was cut weren't clear as of the announcement, but this move has already sparked a firestorm of reactions. To understand why this is such a big deal, we need to look at the broader context of Trump's clemency decisions and the advocacy that led to this moment. Trump has a history of using his presidential clemency powers in ways that grab headlines, often for controversial figures. Think back to 2020, when he commuted the sentence of Roger Stone, a political advisor convicted of lying to Congress and witness tampering. That decision was widely criticized as political favoritism, and some see parallels with Hoover's case, though the contexts are different. Hoover's commutation isn't about politics in the same way, but it does reflect Trump's willingness to take bold, divisive actions. In his second term, which began in January 2025, Trump has continued to push boundaries with executive actions, including on issues like immigration and criminal justice. Interestingly, this decision aligns with his support for the First Step Act, a 2018 criminal justice reform bill aimed at reducing sentences for nonviolent offenders and improving prison conditions. Hoover himself had sought a sentence reduction under that act in the past, arguing he had distanced himself from the Gangster Disciples and wanted to focus on community development. But let's talk about the advocacy that made this commutation possible, because it's a key part of the story. One of the biggest voices pushing for Hoover's release has been Kanye West, the famous musician and Chicago native. Kanye has been vocal about this cause for years, going all the way back to 2018 when he met with Trump at the White House and specifically asked for Hoover's commutation. Kanye even organized a free Larry Hoover benefit concert with Drake in 2021, and he's referenced Hoover in his music, like in songs from his album Donda. For Kanye, this isn't just about one man, it's about broader criminal justice reform, about giving people a second chance, especially those from communities like Chicago's, where gang violence and systemic challenges have deep roots. There's also been a petition on Change.org since 2018, highlighting Hoover's efforts in prison to promote education and renounce gang violence, framing him as a reformed figure who deserves clemency. So, why is this decision so controversial? It comes down to a fundamental tension between mercy and accountability. On one side, supporters of the commutation argue that Hoover, who's now in his 70s, has served enough time. Over 50 years in prison, much of it in solitary confinement, That's a harsh punishment by any measure. They point to his reported efforts to change, like renouncing the gangster disciples and advocating for inner-city growth. They see this as a step toward addressing mass incarceration, especially for people who've spent decades behind bars and may no longer pose a threat. This perspective aligns with broader criminal justice reform movements that emphasize rehabilitation over punishment, particularly for older inmates. But on the other side, there are serious concerns about public safety, especially in Chicago. The gangster disciples, under Hoover's leadership, were linked to drug trafficking, violence, and hundreds of murders. Critics, including law enforcement and some political figures, worry that releasing Hoover could embolden gang activity in a city that's already struggling with violence. Back in 2021, Chicago's then-mayor Daley publicly opposed Hoover's parole, reflecting a long-standing fear that his influence, even from prison, has been dangerous. Some former prosecutors, like Ronald Safer, have said Hoover bears responsibility for a vast amount of harm, and they question whether his claims of reform are genuine. This debate isn't new. Back in 1993, Hoover had some support from Chicago politicians for parole, but he was denied, showing how divisive his case has always been. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture. This commutation isn't just about Larry Hoover, it's a microcosm of the larger struggle in the American criminal justice system. How do we balance the need for punishment with the possibility of redemption? How do we address the legacy of mass incarceration, especially for communities disproportionately impacted by it, while ensuring public safety? Trump's decision also raises questions about the use of presidential clemency. Historically, clemency has been a tool for mercy, but when it's applied to high-profile, controversial figures, it can fuel perceptions of favoritism or political motivations. Compare this to Roger Stone's case. Both commutations sparked backlash, but for different reasons. Stone's was seen as protecting a political ally, while Hoover's is about navigating the complex terrain of crime and reform. There's also a cultural dimension here that's worth exploring. Hoover's story resonates deeply in Chicago, where the gangster disciples have left a lasting mark. Kanye West's involvement isn't just about advocacy. It's about a cultural narrative that frames Hoover as a symbol of potential redemption, someone who can inspire change in communities plagued by violence. Kanye's music, his concerts, his public statements, they've all helped keep Hoover's name in the spotlight, turning this into more than just a legal issue. It's a story about identity, community, and the hope for second chances, even for someone with a past as troubled as Hoover's. As of right now, May 28, 2025, reactions to the commutation are still unfolding. News outlets like CBS Chicago and the Daily Mail have reported on it, and there's chatter on social media, with journalists like Jasmine Wright confirming the news on X. But we don't yet have a full picture of how Chicago officials, Congress, or the public at large will respond. Given the history of this case, we can expect a split. Some will celebrate this as a victory for reform, while others will condemn it as a reckless move that puts communities at risk. What happens next will be crucial. Will Hoover's release lead to positive contributions, as his supporters hope? Or will it have unintended consequences, as critics fear? Only time will tell. To wrap up, the commutation of Larry Hoover's sentence is a story that captures so many of the challenges and contradictions of our time. It's about crime and punishment, mercy and justice, power and responsibility. It forces us to ask hard questions about who deserves a second chance, and how we as a society can move forward from a past marked by violence and systemic inequality. As this story continues to develop, it'll be fascinating to see how it shapes the conversation on criminal justice reform and the legacy of Trump's presidency. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope this has shed some light on a complex and important issue. Let's keep the conversation going.